Hey, how's it going, everybody? I wanted to do a video right quick. I was doing a video the other day. First of all, my name is Mark. For those that are new to the channel and maybe tuning into this video, um, my name is Mark. I call my channel Mark's Music Place because I talk about music, the music industry, recording, gear, music, you name it. So, if you like the content, please subscribe, share the video, and please write some comments. Please give me a thumbs up if you really like the video. It all helps the channel. Now, with that being said, what I wanted to do was I really wanted to talk about how musicians get paid or who's getting paid. Um, I really wanted to talk about that simply because someone brought it up about in a comment about producers, and they brought up producers and who's really getting paid. So what I wanted to do, what I really wanted to do, was talk about that. So okay, so let's talk about it. So here we go. All right. In this first, what this really is talking about is here you got really two sides of the industry on the business. When we talk about the music business side, not necessarily the industry. The industry is basically a career field, but the music business is the side where people get paid. That's the that's the business side. Who's getting paid what? Now you have to look at it in two ways. The two entities are publishing companies and record labels. Publishing companies and record labels. So with that being said, on the publishing companies basically are in control of the rights of a song that's created by a songwriter. A song, I used to think for a long time the song was what you're hearing. But what you're hearing is a sound recording. When you watch, whether you listen to um, the radio or watch the video or something like that, you've listened to a sound recording. You've listened to a producer's interpretation of what they were trying to bring out, based on the songwriter's content, their idea. That's what you were listening to. A sound recording. The best way to describe a sound song itself, like a composition, would probably be like sheet music, print music, because even though you can give some sheet music to a musician to play it, even though the sheet music can be written in a way that will make a musician interpret how the songwriter was intending the song to be played, with all the way the conductor, would bring in different um in the way the musician would express based on how the director would direct the musician to express it. Well, the way one musician would play that song and the way that another musician would play that same sheet music would probably be a really, really close, but then a little bit of those different musicians' personality will come out in the way their playing styles. That's what a sound recording is. It's an interpretation of the songwriter's composition, their ideas, their expression. So, with that being said, that's why there's two parts to it. So, normally you would have publishers that get music uh, that's written by songwriters. Now, and the publisher's intent is to try to get these songs licensed to different entities such as mechanical rights, performance rights, sync rights, grand rights, and print rights to different entities that may be able to use that song. The only thing is, most people will get those songs once they've heard sound recordings. For most, for for the purpose of like maybe Graham, which deals with opera and not necessarily opera, but theater. Um, Print would be actually written on print sheet music, so there's no sound recording to it. It's just written on sheet music the way the songwriter probably intended it. Sometimes the sheet music is printed out in the way it was printed based on the sound recording of the songwriter's intent. So it can go either way. The sync rights are so they can attach that sound recording based on that song written by the songwriter to TV or a movie or a commercial or a video game. Then there would be the performance rights. So whenever that song is performed on the radio, in other words, you listen to the radio, there's the performance, and then there's the mechanical, which allows that song to be created to a sound recording that can be attached to a CD, a vinyl, a cassette, a digital download, streaming. So those are the five types of license that gives these songwriters rights to these songs that they write. Well, now we got the record label. The record label or recording label, which would be the record labels would be, they're in the business of creating records. Records are sound recordings. The records themselves are CDs, vinyls, cassettes, digital downloads, and the record labels that owns those rights would be companies like Epic, Interscope, Columbia, Arista, Jive, Def Jam, Death Row. It just goes on. EMI, Capitol, all these different record labels. They're in the business of making records. And they want to make records because they're trying to business of not only just making these records, but selling these records. So the record labels sometimes own the publishing companies, and sometimes they are work with publishing companies. Sorry about the explosive there. I got a screen, but sometimes these those B's and P's come through a little heavy. So the record label are in the business of selling records because records are physical copies that they can make. They're physical hard copies, like a CD, a vinyl, cassette. So they're trying to sell records, but the label themselves can't sell the records. They need record artists, meaning recording artists. So once the recording is done, it turns into a record, right? We call them songs or music, but that's what they are. The recording is once it becomes a physical version of a recording, it becomes a song, which is basically becomes a record. That's why it's called a record label or a song label. They create recordings. Well, record labels obtain mechanical rights to these songs coming from songwriters. They obtain mechanical rights. They basically purchase mechanical rights from publishing companies, and a lot of times because they are the publishing company as well, they don't necessarily have to struggle to get their own mechanical rights because they are the publisher, so they own their publishing. So what they'll do is they'll create themselves a mechanical right to be able to take that song and turn it into a sound recording. Once they turn it into a sound recording, then that allows them to basically contract recording artists to record those songs, those internal songs from the songwriters into sound recordings. So the song itself is then there's two copyrights are created. A PA form for performing arts copyright and an SR form, which is a sound recording copyright. The PA form is for the songwriter, and the RSR form is for the record label to be able to test that song to a mechanical, physical hard. That's what it's for. It allows that to be attached to a CD, vinyl, cassette. So now the songwriters are usually contracted to a publishing company. So they get a publishing deal. Recording artists are usually contracted to a record label to record. That's why most recording artists don't write their own songs, because the contract most of the time will not let them write their own songs. They will only allow them to record the songs that the record label already have. So these songs, so in a record label, and I got a different video on record labels, but what happens is so how do the record labels, how do they find these artists? Well, they get scouts. Sometimes the record label may know someone through a lawyer, maybe some artist managers work closely with some labels, but most of the time they have A&R, which stands for artist and repertoire. And the artist and the A&R will usually go out and find these recording artists to be able to get them a contract to one of the record labels. So the recording artist they sign a recording deal with the record label, and it just depends on how confident they have in the talent of this artist they find. So when they find it really varies. Some artists can be just absolutely amazing vocalists. Some are decent, some are okay, and then some are just niched. Just depends on the talent of the recording artist / musicians, band, rapper, whatever. So with that being said, the recording artist would now sign a record deal with a record label, whether it's a major or an independent or whatever the case may be. Now, the record label, what they'll do is have the recording artist link up with A&R to A&R, and what they'll usually do is usually the old way was to advance the artist so much money. They would give them so much money up front, called an advance, so they can go out and so they can go to a record recording studio to record these songs for the record label, so they can turn these songs they get from songwriters into sound recordings. So usually the A&R will say, here, I got a list of songs written by these different songwriters. And they'll say, okay, I need you to go to the studio with this advance money that you got and record. And sometimes the recording studios can only certain recording studios can be approved by the record label. It'll all be detailed in their contract. So the recording artists can usually are only allowed to record songs. They use some recording artists can't write their songs. It just depends on the recording contract. Some recording artists can write like certain rappers, certain singers, a lot of bands. Some of them do get songwriting in their contract, but then they'll negotiate if the rapper, the artist, the band, the musicians, or whatever are allowed to write their songs, they'll be negotiating in the contract what percentage the record label is going to take of those publishing as well. But the record labels always, almost 90% of the time, will take pretty much, they'll usually going to own the master sound recordings. So the master sound recordings here, the masters. That's why you always hear that word, the masters, the sound recording masters, which means this recording artist, once they get done coming out of the studio, they record all these songs. They give them to the A&R. The A&R then comes up with a list of the songs they're going to put on a CD or whatever the case, or what they're going to ready to distribute. The A&R present these list of songs out of so many to the record label to be released. The record label is the final authority to decide what songs they're going to release, because the record label is in basically in the business of selling records, and they want to sell records they know they can sell. They don't want to take chances on putting out too many songs that they know they can't sell. So that's the reason why that is. With all that being said, with all that being said, so um, moving on to the recording artists. So the recording artists are going to be linked up with producers and so forth. Now, to discuss a little bit more of what's going on with the recording artists and the songwriters, publishers, publishing companies, and the record labels, we're going to move on to the two main royalties. Sometimes there's royalties from sync, if they can get these songs synced to a movie, commercial, video game. That rarely happens. That probably only happens to about 10% of artists that can get a sync, get their songs that they recorded to, and it's usually the songwriter's song, not necessarily the artist, unless the artist, recording artist is the songwriter. But that just depends. Most of the time, these are the two main concentrations. So whenever sound recordings are made, the mechanical royalties allow those songs to be put on a physical hard CD to be, or vinyl or cassette or digital download, allows those songs to be distributed, manufactured and distributed. And when it allows it to be distributed, it's going to go to different places, like stores, online stores, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or whoever sells physical hard copies. As well as they're going to try to get them on terrestrial radios, like all your different radio stations based on the genre. If it's country and western, or it's rock station, or it's an R&B station, hip hop station, they try to get them on all those. So if the Stones get on the radio, then what happens is the songwriters that are registered with a PRO, such as ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC, or whatever, they then the songs are then registered with their performance rights organizations, and BMI and ASCAP then starts listening to all these different entities, including if it's a live show. Let me go back. If it's a live show, live shows, venues, casinos, or any satellite radio, anywhere that plays this stuff over a system in public. With performance rights, the live shows, venues, casinos, even churches, any place that performs songs live or on the radio, the PROs will make sure that these entities have obtained a license from their publishing company to allow them to play those songs. Usually, a publishing company would have a catalog of songs by different songwriters, and usually it's hundreds to thousands of them. So that allows these terrestrial radio, internet radio, satellite radio, and all these different things to play these on the radio. They obtain a license. The license allows them a selection of all kinds of songs that they allow to play on this radio. Now, every time the song is played, based on their algorithms, it generates a certain amount that the PROs will then say, okay, this radio played this song 2,000 times in a month. That's an algorithm that allows them to send money back to the publisher, and the publisher will split a certain percentage between the PRO and the publisher. The publisher then splits that money between the publisher and the songwriter. And that's how the songwriter gets their royalty for that. Now, the recording artists do not get PRO performance because they didn't write the song. The recording artist only recorded the song, unless it's in the contract where the recording artist is the songwriter. Then they can get that if the recording contract says they're allowed to own their publishing. Sometimes the record labels will come up with a contract that does not allow the recording artist to own their publishing. So even though the recording artist can be the songwriter, their contract says they cannot own their publishing. So the record labels still own their publishing. So people can see where can really get messed up. Okay. The mechanical rights, which is the sounds of the master recordings, are owned by the record label. So whenever CDs, vinyls, cassettes, digital downloads are sold, all that money goes to the person that owns the sound recording masters, which is usually the recording record label. Now, if an independent artist wasn't signed to a record label or a publishing company and they own their own publishing and they were their own recording artists, all master sound recordings, if it gets in the, in stores or whatever, all physical sales would go to that independent. I keep hitting the mouse. Would go back to the recording artist or the person that owns, whoever owns the rights. But most of the time, they're owned by the record label. That's why, and that would the mechanical rights. How they get paid is by mechanical rights organizations such as Easy Song or Harry Fox or these different types of master right organizations that monitors the sales of music versus the performance of music, which is done by the PROs. The MROs master the sale. They manage the sales of music, and some of these MROs would be like who's managing the sales would be SoundScan and Sound Exchange. SoundScan would be physical, hard like CDs, vinyls, cassettes. Sound Exchange would be digital downloads, like they get it from like iTunes or something, or download it from Amazon Music or whatever the case. Also, the music gets on streaming because streaming is really actually reproducing the song technically, not necessarily recording the song, but just reproducing it by playing it over and over and over and over. That's called reproducing. That's also falls under mechanical royalties. So every time the song is streamed, it goes to the person who owns the master sound recordings, who owns the master sound recording rights. Since the record labels own the master sound recording rights, that money from the streaming sites such as Spotify, Pandora, all that music, all that money generated from the streaming websites will go back to the record label, unless the person is not signed with a record label. Then, if it's streamed on Pandora, if it's streamed on Spotify or Pandora, then that money goes to the independent artist. So that's how that money is made. That's why it's important for an independent artist to be registered with an MRO and not just a PRO. They need to be registered with both. So now, the old way was, as we move on to the next few slides, the old way was that this was usually about the amount on the physical sale of songs, meaning the master sound recordings that are sold in stores. So whenever you buy a CD, cassette, vinyl, whatever, you're buying a copy of a sound of works of songs recorded by recording artists or musicians or bands or rappers, whatever. Well, the physical sale was that the record label said, well, we're going to take this, usually on average, this amount of percentage, 65, but sometimes it could be up as much as 85% of the physical sale of music is going to go to the record label. And then a small amount would go to distributors, and the percentage left over from the sales would then go to the artists. But the artists still have to pay their personal manager, which is their artist manager, their business manager, producers, the lawyer, and they also have to split between, if there's more than just one artist, like if it's a group or a band, the rest of that has to be split between them. Whether it's a drummer, guitar player, keyboard player, singer, or if it's all a 4-singer group, 3-singer group, solo artist, whatever. That all that little small percentage here is split, after the sales. That's why it says a point system. And 15% would be like a 15 point of sales, but a lot of times it's a lot less than that. Sometimes they only give them 1 or 2 points percentage out of 100% of that song or CD or album. Out of 100%, the artist will get this amount. Sometimes they get less than that. Sometimes it's only 1 or 2 points, 1 or 2%, or 1 or 2 points, or 3 points, or whatever. So it's broken down to a points, and then the artist manager will get a certain percentage made out of that 15%. Then that breaks down to, you take that 50% left over. So a good example would be, if you take 5 million, if you take a CD and it went gold, in other words, it sold at least 500,000 units. If it made at $10 a pop, you're talking $5 million. Well, you're talking at least, at least 65% is going to go to the record label. So 65% of five out of $5 million, you're probably looking at 3.5 million went back to the label. Then a couple of million, so you only got that little 15% left over, or 15%. Because if you take, what's 10% of 5 million? 500,000, right? So if you're talking 10%, it would be, 10% of 5 million would be, 500,000, right? So 15%, at least $750,000, right? If you do the math, 750,000 would be about 15%. Well, out of $750,000, that the artist, the group has to pay their business manager this a percentage, the producer gets a certain percentage, the lawyer gets a certain percentage, 3% of that. So 3% of $750,000 go to the producer. The lawyer, the business manager gets about 5% of that $750,000. And then on top of that, the personal manager gets 15% or whatever it is. And the rest is split between the artists. But nobody can get paid until the artist can give all the money that they got advanced from the record label back. That's the messed up part. So now, that's one way the artist makes money, and producers and managers get their money. Now, if the artist doesn't owe the record label anything, most of the time the artists have to tour now to be able to pay their manager, the business manager, the lawyer, the producer. They got the tour. He or she, or the band, or the musicians, or the group, or the rapper, or whatever, have to tour. So now, who's getting paid when they can get paid? Okay, who's going to make money when they can get paid when it's time to get paid? Well, an old system was that recording artists would get in advance. So most of these situations here are going to be a one-time work for hire for that particular project only. So they're only going to get paid. These people that involved, the people involved are going to get this up front. They're supposed to get that. So that's why the artist gets advance, because they need to be able to pay in advance a work for hire for this one-time project. So what they're going to do is, most of the time they're going to first, the artist's going to need to they're going to need to hire session musicians to play the music if they can't play it themselves. They're going to hire session musicians. These session musicians are then contracted in a work for hire agreement to play, and it might be, depending on how many musicians you get, it could be anywhere from $25 to $100 per song based on the musician. So if the musician is going to play 10 songs, $100 a pop, that's $1,000 that you got to pay that musician to play those 10 songs. For that one particular musician, you might have 6 musicians. So you think about it, $1,000, 10 songs, $1,000 a musician, $1,000, 6 musicians, that's $6,000 coming out of your advance budget. Same thing with beat makers. They might, or song creators. Song creators, unlike musicians, song creator will be someone like myself that can, as an example, that can create all the music in my own personal studio, as an example, I can create the entire track arrangement, and so I can get, I would be paid whatever I charge to create songs. It could be $500 a song, it could be $1,000 song, it could be $10,000 song. Someone like Teddy Riley might charge $15,000 a song, but he'll create all the entire tracks. Sometimes when you have Teddy Riley's as a producer, if you got his track record, he can afford to charge $15,000 a song, because out of all those songs, the music's probably gonna be slamming enough that it's gonna create a hit for the music side is gonna be a hit anyway. So same thing with beat makers, whether you're making beats for rappers or whatever, same thing. Musicians, song creators, beat makers, whatever that you pay, so it's a one-time payment for that, and that's it. That's all that the songwriters, that's all the session musicians, beat makers, songwriters get. That other than that, what else do they receive? They receive credit for playing or creating those songs. That's it. But now the song creators and beat makers can also do what they call co-writing on the song. They can co-write. So and this would be a musical arrangement that can actually go on part of the sound recording, the SR form, for the musical arrangement created by the beat maker, the song creators, and even session musicians. It all depends on the agreement is worked out. So the songwriter, the SR form, these musicians can create an agreement that say, okay, we're going to get part of the copyright for the sound recording, which then might be entitle them to a little bit of mechanical royalties for the song creator and beat makers and session musicians, when the artist or the record label is making money off the mechanical royalties. They might be entitled to that if it's written in the song, if it's written in the SR form. So there you have it on that. Now, on the recording studios, they're going to be they're going to be based on a rent. So the recording studios will allow you to rent their space, use their gear, and even rent to use their engineers and so forth as a rented on a work for hire agreement to rent that studio. And the recording studio is going to say, okay, well, this is our rate. We charge $150 an hour or whatever we charge an hour. And, we charge $150 an hour up to $10 a day and you're allowed to lock the studio out 10 hours a day for this amount of weeks. They might write up an agreement and say, okay. And the payments to the recording studio would be how the recording studio, you pay that a fee to the recording studio. They might say, we won't have up front. We want so much after the recording's done or whatever. So that's the agreement between the artist, producer, and the artist in the studio. And the credits for the recording studio would be this: they're going to get credit for the artists and the producers using that studio, which would lead to like Grammy or BET or Music Award, whatever the Academy is. They get credit for the artists using that studio. That's how the recording studios make their money. Engineers are hired for one time. They're hired as one-time work for hire agreements to work on those, to engineer the songs for the artists. Sometimes the producer and the engineers might work to come up with a certain engineer that they want to use, because they know that the engineer is going to know how to get the songs, whatever it's the recording engineer, mixing engineer, even master engineer. And a lot of times these are the same studios. Sometimes they're separate studios. They know they're going to get the song recorded properly. They know they're going to get the song mixed properly. They know they're going to get the song mastered properly. And this is how the engineers make their money. And they're paid on an hourly rate, or they're paid on so much. They're paid on so much their time. So it depends on how you have to look at the agreement of the engineers. And the credit for the engineer would be they get credit for engineering the project, as well as they can get credit toward an Academy Award, such as a Grammy, BET Award, MTV Award, VH1 Award, Soul Train Award, so forth. Okay. And the last person that's going to get paid, how how they're going to get paid is producers get points for CD sales, like 3 points or whatever. Um, Sometimes the producers will work with the record labels, and their 3% come out of that 3% of the bigger pot that the record label gets. Other producers might only get a 3% point off the percentage that the artist is going to get. So a lot of times the producers say, okay, well, I get producer points for the sale of my so many percentage of the sales of the CDs, um, as well as an upfront producer's fee for producing each song or an entire project. That's how a producer gets paid. And that's it. The producer gets paid to just to produce the song or the song project, and that's it. And they might get and everything else is based on how many CDs, vinyls, cassettes, digital downloads are being sold, and they'll get a percentage of that. That's it. Now, cost and recoupment. Usually, the recording artist is given advance. Usually, these days they're not anymore, but they used to get advancements, and they would get these advancements like 300,000, 400,000, half a million, couple of million. What it depends on the budget that the record label is going to advance the artist, but that's going to be recouped. So the artists have to be careful not to take all those advances. And most of the advances used to pay for their studio time, producers, business managers, so they can pay all those people, get it out the way, so they don't worry about leaving those people hanging. Because if the artists don't never ever make money, they're gonna basically screw everybody because they owe so much that they can't recoup to pay back the label. They can't pay no one else, the lawyer. So most of the time they gotta budget some of that advance money to pay their producer, their studio engineer, the musicians, everyone involved everyone involved here. So they got to be careful how you budget this, because that money is also for recording and living, and also the record label might give these people touring and merchandise support. It's gonna be very, very costly to tour, super expensive, and also to have merchandise created. But the record label is gonna, they're also gonna recoup when it comes to touring the cost of booking venues for the artists have to perform at, the traveling, hotels, food, security, support to be able to pay the support road crews that's going to move all the year, audio rental places for sound and audio engineering companies that's you can rent to run the sound, lights, because all that stuff has to be put up, tested, sound checks, and all this stuff. And dancers, choreographers, and all this other stuff. But also at the same time, the record label was supposed to be doing stuff like publicity stuff and marketing for the artists, such as maybe helping them get on TV spots, radio promotions, TV spots, get on the radio, autograph signings, Academy Award attendance, magazine articles, video and internet, all this. But all these stuff to do all that can be recouped back from the artist. That's why this thing can go down it can get expensive for the artist to try to pay back all the recoupment that the record label wants back. One of the biggest and what was the fastest way to get artists heard so people can actually know who the artist is and actually start liking the artist was video and radio. And a lot of times people always say, well, a record label can get my stuff on the radio. Actually, they couldn't, because you got thousands of artists competing and the radios only have so many radio spots. So how do they do it? A lot of times it was this right here, behind closed door payola. We're going to pay to get this artist on the radio. That's the only way they can usually get them on the radio, to try, especially give them a light, medium, or heavy rotation. That's a different video. Same thing. Video stations only had so many spots for artists, such as BET or VH1 or MTV. So a lot of that happened there too. And all that payola or behind the doors closed, the record labels would charge the artists for that too. We got you on the radio. We got you on the radios on New York, Chicago. We got you in LA. We got you all these different places. They paid a little something under the table. That doesn't always happen. Um, sometimes the radio stations and the BET stations have really good connections with all these different radio stations that they can call the radio station and say, "Hey, we got this new artist," and because of the record label's reputation, such like Capitol, most major record labels can just call up pretty much all the radio stations and say, "I got this artist. They're hot, and here's their song. We're gonna sing the song. We need you to get them into rotation." And most of the time, the program directors and all that can actually get them into rotation. It varies. So, uh, okay. So, lastly, when it comes to the payment of the artist, once the artist, so the artist got paid two ways pretty much. The artist got paid based on a percentage of the sales, which was a point system, and touring. And then if they can sell merchandise, if they can make money doing guest appearances on radio or TV, or maybe even a movie, maybe and whatever the case may be, that's how the artist would get paid. But a lot of times the artist got paid after all the recoupments and debt that they owe the record labels. The artists usually didn't make any money from the sales at all because they owed so much advance. Um, so the artist, um, once the artist get their cut, the artist cuts pays the cut. Basically the artist cut from the money made pays their business manager usually 5%. So if they got $750,000, they had to pay 5% of that to the business manager. 15% would usually go to the artist manager. Maybe another 5% would go of that $750,000 would go to the road manager, security. But then the artist manager, out of their touring support, still got to pay for sound, lights, road crews, light crews, stage. They still got to pay for dancers, musicians, traveling musicians. These are different from the session musicians in the studio. The traveling musicians are the ones performing on stage with the artists. And then they have to pay the producer fee, upfront fees, the musicians, the beat makers, and the songwriters in the studio, the song creators in the studio. But hopefully the artists have made enough money to be able to do all that, because if the artists don't never have any money because they're always in debt to the record label, they can't never do these shows that can do. They will do these most of the time the artists have to travel with just soundtracks, and they only have pre-recorded music, and they're the only one doing an appearance. This is why sometimes you'll go and see some artists and they'll be on the stage and they're just singing with a microphone, and there's no band, there's no dancers, there's none of that, because the artists don't have the money to pay that. So most of the time, most artists, until they can start making money, so they can start making money off the tours and everything else, and they can pay back the label all their recoupments and debt. You know, hopefully the album is going platinum or double platinum, where they can get out of debt with the record label. The more successful the album is, and the sales of the record label, the sales, meaning platinum, double platinum, triple platinum, diamond, whatever, the more the record make money, the more the artist can pay back. So basically, if an artist only put out an album when only went gold, 500,000 copies, they probably will never get out of debt with the record label. But if the artist so went platinum, they probably can break even. But if the artists go double platinum, they probably, or triple platinum, they might have just enough where they don't only debt to the label, and they can pay everyone else, and they can actually breathe a little bit. So there you have it. So this is going to wrap up this video of who's getting paid what. So I thought this would be a good video to put out, to show people what?